take us through Pride. How did you get involved with, at the time, the second, or some people could even argue the biggest promotion when you got involved with?
Well, I'd definitely say they were the biggest at the time. Definitely the biggest. Well, what happened was I was with King of the Cage and I had a couple years with them. Really loved being a part of their team. You know, I was working with Terry Treblecock, and we were doing shows around the country. First in Southern California, then in different parts of the country. You know, like we were like in places like Michigan or Northern California, and just different places. It was always fun to be a part of. And at the time, we had a kind of a loose association, or I don't know if I'd still call it a partnership, but there was a working relationship with Pride. We were trading fighters, and we were having some King of the Cage fighters go to Japan, and a couple Japanese fighters come fight in King of the Cage. And Pride would have executives at the King of the Cage shows on occasion, including Mr. Sakakibara, who at the time he wasn't the president of Pride, but he was one of the top guys. And you know, I worked with them, you know, on the King of the Cage side, and just came to the point of, you know, one of those days they just said, you should be working for us. So I guess they liked how I worked and how I handled the relationship. You know, it was a pleasure working with them, but because of the culture differences, it wasn't always the easiest thing. So sometimes it took a lot of patience, and you know, again, I just wanted to deliver on what I said I would do, and you know, I guess there was something in me that they liked because I was pretty young, and they just said you should be working for us. So I said okay, and they gave me a whole bunch more money, and that made it easy. But at the same time, you know, I knew what Pride was at the time. I knew the relevance of it, so I'd been watching it on pay-per-view, and I knew how big it was. And you know, I ended up becoming their when they hired me, I became their youngest executive, and I also became the first non-Japanese that company had ever hired. So it was a big deal, certainly to me. It was a big deal to them too, because this was uncharted territory for them. They brought me on board because they wanted me to help them expand into the U.S. market, and they felt with the experience I had at King of the Cage and the relationships that it was we would work well together, and I think that we did.
And then you ultimately helped them produce 2 dream shows here in the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was the one that Nick Diaz beat Gomi, was that in Japan or was that here?
No, that was in Las Vegas.
That was in Las Vegas.
Yeah. What ended up happening with Pride is they brought me on board because they wanted to expand in the U.S. So
But did they have an ulterior motive? Did they want to get bought by the UFC?
Oh, no.
No. I mean, okay. We'll pick up what you were going to say.
Okay.
And then we'll get back into
Well, I was just going to say that, you know, when I was hired, the understanding was that I was hired because they wanted to start having events in the U.S. So that was what I expected, but it didn't end up that way. They just would never pull the trigger on it, which was
We had 2 shows.
We did, but those were like 3 years after I was hired. Mm-hmm. You know, so. I came on board because I wanted to help them expand in the U.S., meaning live events. Mm-hmm. So what happened was, because they wouldn't pull the trigger on the events, I ended up becoming more of a business executive, handling different types of deals for them, whether it was like home video or merchandise or whatever it was. And then I would end up working with some of the fighters as well when they needed fighters brought over to Japan, American fighters, mm-hmm. or certain matchups. I would have input, you know, when they would ask me for it, on what I thought would be good matches or what fighters, up and coming fighters in the U.S. would be great for Pride. So I ended up doing that as well. You know, they didn't have the events in the U.S. until 2006 and 2007, so it was way after they hired me. But I was a big part of both of those shows, and those shows were the reason that they hired me. So, you know, I think that's the time I felt I was at my best for them. And, you know, I definitely busted my butt to make those shows as great as I could. And, you know, at the time I had more input on the fight cards than on the Japanese fight cards. I mean, I always have a little bit of input, but at this point, it was, we're in America, we want to bring in more American fighters and have more of those matchups. So, you know, we ended up talking about different matches, and the Gomi-Diaz match was a match that I had proposed. So we knew Gomi was going to fight. We were just looking for the right opponent for him. And they were not that familiar with Nick Diaz, and I was. So he was available. Originally, actually, it was going to be Dwayne Ludwig, but Dwayne wasn't available. But
well, I'm glad, because that was the fight that really set Diaz apart. This is Ruben. I'm just going to let Ruben know that we're doing the interview.
Yep.
Hey, Ruben, we're doing the interview. It's going great. All right, thanks, man. That's so cool. Well, ultimately, those two fights did help expand Pride's name even more in the United States. Do you think that, I mean, so why did Pride, was it that Pride had financial problems and they were put in a position where they had to be bought by the UFC? Or there wasn't the ulterior motive of, let's do a couple shows in the United States, get the UFC interested and sell it off to them?
Well, honestly, at that point in the game, you know, Pride was having financial problems in Japan, and they decided to do the U.S. shows. So, in my mind, we were having the U.S. shows because we were hoping that maybe it was a little bit desperate, I don't know, but you know, decided, I guess, to roll the dice and see if it could work with the live events in the U.S. I mean, I wish we would have done it sooner, because I think it would have been more effective. But I don't think that Pride was having had those two shows in the U.S. just to sell out to the UFC. I think there was an effort to try and expand quickly because of what was going on in Japan, and it was just too little, too late, unfortunately.